Alright, so hello everybody. This is the More Knowledge Show, coming to you every week live in Alabama in the United States of America. This is episode 8, I'm pretty sure. But a lot has happened. So, well, not very much, but the things that have happened, a lot of important stuff has happened. So we had the announcement of added tariffs to 10% on $300 billion worth of products from China. And we also, China's basically saying that they are going to retaliate, probably with tariffs of their own. We had a Federal Reserve, they cut interest rates by 25 points, and the market responded pretty bad to it. The main reason was the Federal Reserve, after they cut interest rates, they basically said that it's going to be the only interest rate cut, and the markets were expecting them to announce the start of a cycle of easier policy, because that's pretty much what is needed at this point. So you got a combination of tariffs. We had some terrible, well, not terrible, it was pretty bad. We had some terrible manufacturing surveys that came out, and we have a Federal Reserve who is not openly admitting that they are going to cut interest rates by a ton. But, another thing that the Federal Reserve did do is that the Federal Reserve did not just cut interest rates. They also announced that they were going to end the shrinking of the balance sheet. They were going to end it like 2 months before it was originally supposed to end. So basically, when they shrink the balance sheet, it's a tightening measure that's supposed to take money out of the economy. They're in the last recession, they did quantitative easing, and they purchased a ton of securities. They purchased a ton of things out of the economy. They filled the banks up with these excess reserves, and then now they're trying to take that back out. They're trying to normalize it, so if something else happens again, they'll be able to respond appropriately. But the economy did not respond well to them taking money out of the economy, so they're pausing that. So they're not going to take any more money out of the economy, and they cut interest rates. But that was not good enough, and that really just tells you how far we actually are going to have to go. Because despite what they said in that press conference, when they were like, it's not really the beginning of a cycle, everyone knows. Well, I think everyone pretty much assumes that's not true. If you look at the bond market, the 10-year yield has been dropping. It dropped right after it said that, and when it dropped, that's pretty much a good sign that the market is going to force the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates again. Because when the 10-year yield drops, that generally means that they're expecting lower economic growth and lower inflation. The reason why the Federal Reserve cut interest rates, they want to stimulate economic growth and inflation. If the market expects low inflation, that usually carries out into the economy. That's usually how it works. Inflation expectations lead to actual inflation. So the market is not looking at this interest rate cut as something that's actually going to increase inflation. So the 10-year yield dropped, and basically that's a sign that more is going to have to be done. But another thing about them rolling the money off of they're ending quantitative tightening, which is the opposite of quantitative easing. Another thing about that is, I read something somewhere. This guy was, I think it was like a CNBC article, and it was basically saying how, while they are doing that, they're still going to kind of be, well, basically, all right, if you don't know, they suspended the debt ceiling. So they suspended it, so we don't have a ceiling. So we can basically borrow as much money as we want. And the Treasury is planning on increasing their cash. So they're gonna take on a lot of, they're gonna borrow a lot of money. So what happens when you borrow a lot of money? You have to sell treasuries. So they're going to be selling a ton of treasuries, like a lot more than has been sold over the past year. And if you supply and demand, you increase the supply of treasuries, but the demand is not increased as well, what's going to happen? The price of treasuries are going to go down, and interest rates are going to rise. And that was kind of the fear of quantitative tightening. Was it? Wait, that's a dog. Okay, all right, we're good. I'm not very good with those animals, but that was kind of the fear of quantitative tightening, was that it could potentially lead to higher interest rates because the Federal Reserve will not be there to buy bonds. Well, now the Treasury is going to start selling bonds again, and if there's not enough buyers, that could lead to higher interest rates. So the interest rate cut and the end of quantitative tightening could be offset by the fact that we are going to be spending so much money, and we're going to be selling so many treasuries. And yeah, I'm not too sure how much the market has picked up on it, but it just shows that chances are the central bank is going to have to start repurchasing the securities again to keep the interest rates low. And what's going to happen is, because we were not able to normalize the balance sheet's about to explode way bigger than it's ever been, and we're not even in a recession yet. So that's the first thing that I wanted to cover. So another thing that happened. So the president of the United States, Donald, I forgot what his middle name is, Trump, he announced on Twitter that we are going to be putting tariffs on $300 billion of Chinese products. And this kind of took the market by surprise. Some are saying the reason why he's putting these tariffs down is because he wants to force the Federal Reserve to act to cut interest rates. Because he's been openly saying that he wants the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates by a ton and stop quantitative tightening. And when they only cut by 25 points, and they basically said that that's going to be the only one. Trump, he did not like that. He went on Twitter, he complained. So some people are saying that this could be a result to that, and he knows that he could just put these tariffs up, and then the Federal Reserve will hopefully act the way he wants to act. So some people think this is an attempt by the president to pressure the central bank into doing what he wants. But another thing, just to think about this whole trade war as a whole, there's quite a bit of problems with it. I would say one of the problems is that Donald Trump, it's like the idea of trying to get China to act in a better way in its interactions with other countries. There's definitely nothing wrong with that. There's no doubt China is a very corrupt country. China does a lot of pretty bad things. China, a lot of stuff is true. Like, you hear about China, that's not just propaganda. That's not just an excuse to go after them. They actually are pretty bad when it comes to their trade practices. There's no doubt about that. But I think the way we're going about it, it's pretty bad. Because I think Donald Trump, he has this idea that America, we're just in such a powerful position to where we can just throw anything at them, and then we're gonna use our pressure to just make them basically just submit to us. And we're not just gonna do this with China, we're gonna do this with the whole world. But that's the problem, because we really can't, because our economy is already slowing down, so we really can't take tariffs. And not only that, when you try to go, the best way to defeat China would be to take a group of countries, not just one country, to collectively get together with the same goal of attacking China. All right, even if we have problems with other countries, I think he would agree that China is probably our biggest problem when it comes to trade. So how about we get with these other countries and we collectively enter into a trade war with China? That would be a lot more effective. But what he's done is he's tried to get into a trade war with China, but at the same time he's opened up trade wars with all these different countries. So we're having to fight off all these countries, and just us one-on-one with China, we're not going to be able to, we probably won't be able to win. But then you add in all these other conflicts, it basically makes it impossible to win, because I think he thinks that the economy is the strongest ever. He might actually believe that. And that idea that the economy is as strong as ever is driving him into making mistakes. And another thing I would say is, I'm not too sure he understands what tariffs are. Because he's always talking about how in the trade war we're going to win it by putting a tax, we're going to tax China. But when you put tariffs, you can't tax China. The tariffs are taxing Americans. And the reason why I actually think he believes that he's taxing China is because Donald Trump is supposed to be someone that supports lower taxes. How can you say you support lower taxes for the reasons why people support lower taxes, and then you are the one who wants to raise taxes? It doesn't really make any sense. So I think he thinks, for whatever reason, he thinks that America is the strongest economy ever in human history, and we can basically knock everyone else around, and we can tax other countries somehow, and there's nothing that anyone else can do about it, and we can get basically all the trade deals in our favor against every single country that we have problems with. He thinks that, and he also thinks that somehow tariffs is not going to hurt Americans. But I'm not sure how he still thinks that when there's like a million Americans, companies have openly said that these tariffs are hurting our company, and in the long run they're going to hurt everybody, not just companies, and it's going to bring down the American economy. So I mean, and he says that we have the upper hand against China, but China isn't really showing any signs of that. If we had the upper hand against China, why did China take so long to buy our agricultural products? If China was so worried about us, then I would think that China would probably act in ways to make America happy. They don't seem to be too worried about how we feel about them there. I mean, like, right now I would say China is winning the trade war, because because China is not running on the idea that their economy is the strongest ever. China doesn't have to worry about that. The president does not have to worry about being reelected. I think they've rallied their people. Their people are behind this. A lot of the people in China are actually participating in not buying American products. They kind of have the support there to get, like, they know what they're doing. They have a vision. America, our vision is completely messed up. Our leadership has no clue what the situation actually looks like, because we keep on saying things like we're going to tax China and we have the strongest economy ever, and we keep on starting new trade wars when we can't even handle one with China. So the fact that the president is not going to realize this until the economy is completely screwed up, and he thinks that if he keeps on pushing, eventually China's going to break. But eventually he's going to realize China is not going to break, and pushing it back means a trade deal will never happen. And he even said on Twitter, he tried to scare China, saying it's possible that we could just have no trade deal. Well, I don't think he actually wants that or think that's going to happen, because he thinks that China is going to fold. But that's if things keep on going, that's what's going to happen. And the cost of everything will rise. Companies, I think the economy is slowing down without a trade war. This is really going to exacerbate whatever. It's going to make the problems much worse. So yeah, that's what I think about the tariffs. And yeah, so also, alright, so another thing I want to talk about is the government. The government, what's their role? And is there a role at all? Because I've been hearing a lot. People saying taxation is basically stealing. Every every single currency the government spends is basically like, it's terrible. Every time the government spends on anything, it's awful. The government just shouldn't exist. I've heard that argument a lot, and the way I would respond to that is, first thing is, government spending is not terrible. You just want to be able to control yourself, and I think that's common sense. But there are people out there who say that government spending is always bad. It's bad when you are running a large, like you're spending much more than you're receiving in a situation when the economy is supposed to be strong. Because when the economy is strong, you kind of want to cut back on spending. You want to keep taxes stable. You don't really want to cut taxes when the economy is already strong. So that way you can have a balanced between the amount you receive and the amount you're spending on. And the reason why you want that is so that way when you enter a downturn in the cycle, you can increase spending and hopefully get your economy out. But when the economy is strong, and then you cut taxes, and then you increase the spending on a ton of things by a ton, what's going to happen is your deficits are going to increase, and they've increased more under Trump than Obama. Like, they've been increasing under Trump by a ton because he cut taxes and he increased spending by a lot. And what's going to happen is, as the economy slows down, the need for the government to spend to make up for the lack of demand from the normal economy is going to go up. But thing is, we're already running such large deficits. It's pretty much inevitable that we are going to run into problems when the next recession hits. So that's kind of my thing. Like, this idea that all government spending is awful, it's not, because a lot of the people who say that are fine with increased spending when it comes down to the military. But the amount we spend on the military is already insanely high. But then it's like people pick and choose what they think is okay to spend on. And some people say spending completely by the government is all bad. There are certain situations, like the government can't run a company. If you think of the government like a company, then yeah, it's a pretty bad business. Because the government, they don't have to worry about making money. Because governments, if they're ever losing money, they can just tax people more or print money. A company couldn't do that. If a company was losing money, they would fail. That's why you don't want the government running the entire economy. But on the other hand, there are certain things that government spends money on that may not make a profit, but they serve a purpose beyond that. Like, if the government spends money on improving education, some people say that may not be profitable, but there's a good reason to want to do that. Like, it may not, if you think of the government like a company, then yes, a lot of the things they spend money on wouldn't make sense. But if you think of their spending on how does this improve lives, it can actually make people's lives better. Because there are countries where governments do spend quite a bit of money, but people's lives are actually better, people are happier, people live longer. So this idea that, if you think of everything in terms of how fast are profits growing, how fast is the economy growing, then yes, if you just look at government spending like that, like how efficient it is in terms of money, in terms of how much money it produces, it's not efficient. And that's why you don't want the government running the entire economy. But spending in certain situations can be good. Alright? If you're spending on, but in a lot of situations, it's not good. So I think the general rule is, not every dollar the government spends is bad, not every dollar is positive, and you want to find a good balance for something like that. But another thing I want to talk about is is taxes stealing, and should the government even exist? Because that's a question. Should the government exist? Well, basically, I'll just say it like this. All right, if you don't have a government to take, let's say, like 20, 25, 30% of your income, then someone else, if that didn't exist, if that government didn't exist, then someone else could just take all of your money, and there would be nothing stopping that, because that's what would happen without a government. The government protects your private property. It sets up the boundaries that allows this society to exist, and allows people to exchange with each other and make sure everything is supposedly fair. But we know it's not, but it's fairer than it would be if there was no government there. So paying taxes is basically like paying a fee for that protection. So if someone comes in and takes your private property, the government can insure you they'll insure you that someone couldn't just do that. And so paying taxes is similar like paying rent. Like if you live in an apartment and then you have to pay rent to your landlord, it's the same idea. The landlord, they provide security, electricity. It depends on what apartment you live in. Some apartments you have to pay for those things, but I mean, they provide yes, some of them have like security, some of them have like a swimming pool. They provide all of these things. They provide some level of protection, and they provide all those things, and then you have to pay rent for it. And so would you say that paying rent is the same thing as stealing? If you wouldn't say that, then I would not say that paying taxes is the same way as stealing. When it comes down, how much taxes should people pay? I think that really depends on what the situation is with the economy. All right, but I think if you can find a general level of taxes, they really that is able to both cover what the needs of the government is, and it's not too high to the point where people aren't even investing money, people pull their money out of the economy, then there's really no reason to move it up or down. Because I would say you don't really want 70% taxes, but you don't want too low taxes, because if you have too low taxes, then the government can't cover its expenses that it has to cover. And if it can't cover its expenses, what is it going to do? It's going to print money. Or if it can't raise money through taxes, it'll simply just print money, and then at the end, you will still be losing a lot of your wealth. And I would argue inflation is more stealing wealth than taxes. The reason why I say that is, the inflation is determined by the central bank. Really creates inflation by controlling the money supply, and as the money supply rises, so does inflation. It may not show in the inflation numbers, but the inflation numbers does not show all the real inflation that exists. If the stock market goes up, a lot of times that's a result of inflation. But it may not show in the price of shoes or the price of food. But just as easy as you can see the stock prices go up, you can see the price of your clothes go up. So yes, like inflation exists a lot. It's just not shown from the CPI. So I would say I wouldn't focus on the CPI. I would focus more on how much is the actual money supply increasing. And as the money supply increases, as a new dollar is added into the circulation, every one of your dollars becomes weaker. And the reason why I would say that's more close to stealing is, first of all, when you pay taxes, you actually do get something in return many times, whether that's public education, protection, the firefighters, all those people that are paid by the government. You do get stuff, you get a lot in return, in fact. And but from inflation, a lot of times the only people that actually win are people who hold stocks or people who hold assets, because those people will see the value of their assets rise with inflation. But normal people do not win. Also, we don't have a say in how much inflation is created. We can vote for politicians who are going to say how much they're going to tax us and where they're going to spend those tax dollars. We don't determine what the central bank does. If the central bank wants to create a lot of inflation, they can wipe out our wealth immediately. It's really not democratic in any way. A lot of times, central banks completely work for a small group of people. So I would say, if we're going to call something stealing, I would call inflation stealing before I would call taxation stealing. But, I think that there's some ideas that, if you lower taxes, the effect is always going to be good. But I think what we saw with these last tax cuts is, I would say that the effect has probably been more bad than good, because the deficits increased, and really the economy did not really improve much. All right, I mean, this illusion that the economy is that much better has very little support behind it. The only thing that the tax cuts really helped was the stock market, because the thing is, the economy was already strong. It's not like the economy was struggling and people were not investing and people weren't hiring. They were. I mean, we were growing, and the growth hasn't really changed since the tax cuts. It's just freed up more money to be put in the stock market instead of going towards supporting the government, and as a result, the government increased spending. Now we have these extremely high deficits that's going to hurt us when the next recession happens. So the idea that tax cuts are always good for the economy, I would say, isn't true, because at the end of the day, we're paying for increased government spending either through taxes or inflation. So if they cut taxes but they still keep spending at the same level, we're going to have to pay for it in the future, either through higher taxes or higher inflation. Okay, so I think that there is a misunderstanding on taxes, what they actually represent. Now, just like an apartment building, with the analogy to paying rent, you don't want to put if you charge the rent too high, there's a good reason to pay rent, but if you charge the rent too high, no one's going to live. No one's going to live in your apartment, and then the apartment will make no money. Just like the government, if you charge taxes too high, if you charge like 90% taxes, people are just going to pull their money out of the economy, and the government will end up still collecting no taxes, even though tax rates are so high. But on the other hand, you don't want to cut taxes too low, because then you also won't be receiving any money. So I think, there's a huge argument over what the size of the government should be, how much they tax us, how much they spend. And I really think that this is not really much to be divided about, because, there's the middle, which is use common sense, spend when necessary, but when things are good, don't spend too much. Tax as needed, but don't overtax, or don't tax too low, and do not run up so much. Do not run the deficits up to the point where you can't pay it, and then you enter into a crisis. I think that's just common sense. But we have such a big debate, and I think that this debate is kind of stupid. Like, what's the point of even having it? Like, this is dividing the country, but I think it's just really just common sense. Just use common sense. All right? Certain situations, the government should spend more. Other situations, they shouldn't. You need to have a government, but you don't want to have a government that's so big that's controlling people. But you need to have a government, and you just need to use your brain and do the simple math and keep things alive. All right, it's not very difficult, but clearly the path we're moving on, it seems that we're going to move farther away from common sense, and it's either going to be people saying that we need no government, we need zero taxes. Then we got people saying that, like, we need 100% taxes. I mean, I don't know if anyone's actually saying that, but I'm sure someone's saying that. Anyway, that's just what I wanted to say. It's pretty hot out here, and I'm walking around, so yeah, it's but it was solid. I forgot what I just did this entire show. Hopefully it was good though. I'm not gonna rewatch it. I'll probably never watch this show again. I'm being honest. You know, when I get older and these shows actually get a lot better, I'm never looking back at these shows. But if y'all want to, if you're watching this in the year 2030, hopefully I'm doing good. Anyway, I'm out. I'll see y'all next week. Yeah, I will see y'all next week. Sometime next week, I'll see y'all. A new article should come out soon. Have a great day.